All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to Secrets to Streamline and Scale Creative and Marketing Workflows. Thank you for joining our webinar today, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first I'd like to take a moment to welcome our speakers. We have Sean Cardy, the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Wrike, Fraser Charles, Director of Global Strategic Partnerships and Media Valet, and Adam Storm, Operations Manager at Miles Partnership. We'll go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves so that you guys can get a little more acquainted with their voices. Sean?
Hi, everybody. This is Sean Cardy. As Laura mentioned, I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Wrike. I focus on Wrike for Marketers, which is a collaborative work management solution geared towards making the work lives of marketers and creatives easier.
Hi, everybody. It's Fraser Charles here. So I've been with Media Valet for 3 years. I run our strategic partnerships program, including that which we've got with Wrike, as well as with many other marketing technology systems integrators, as well as solution providers. And our focus is really to extend the value that our customers can realize with Media Valet in tandem with our partners' products and services. And I think what we're doing with Wrike and the folks of today's webinar is a perfect example of this.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Storm, Technical Operations Coordinator at Miles Partnership. We are the nation's leading destination marketing company and a customer of both Wrike and Media Valet.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. So really quick, let's review the agenda and do a little housekeeping before we get into all of the amazing insights we have in store for you. So first, we're going to walk through some introductions into challenges and opportunities that creative and marketing teams face every day. We'll dig into 3 critical best practices that top teams are leveraging to stay in the flow of their work. After that, we're very excited to have Adam share with us how Miles Partnership has been utilizing these best practices, leveraging both Wrike and Media Valet, and the benefits that he's seen with his team. Finally, we'll go ahead and do an audience Q&A. So if you have any questions during the session, please enter them in the questions box, and we will get them answered for you as best as we can. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Sean to kick off the discussion.
Yeah, so first things first, we're going to be talking about how to streamline and scale marketing and creative workflows in the context of collaborative work management, or CWM, and also digital asset management, or DAM. And so the first part of that is collaborative work management. Wrike was named a leader in the Forrester Wave for collaborative work management in 2016 and 2018. And really what it is, it's a collection of tools for easy yet robust project management in conjunction with collaboration. And so what these tools do is provide a way to connect cross-functional teams across departments throughout their entire organization, and often across geographies in a unified digital workplace. And specifically, Wrike for Marketers also has some additional features which are geared towards solving common problems for marketers and creatives, like Wrike Proof, our proofing and approvals solution, and then also Wrike Publish, which is our integration with digital asset management systems like DAM. So Fraser, if you want to tell us a little bit more about DAM, or digital asset management, take it away.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sean. So like Sean said, DAM stands for Digital Asset Management. And fundamentally, the concept of a DAM is it's a system that's centralized. It's a centralized library that helps companies manage, organize, share, and distribute all of their digital assets or content. And generally, it's aimed at improving the productivity of marketing teams and increasing the ROI of the investment that companies make on their content and creative programs. Some of the key sort of ways that it achieves this are by improving discoverability of that content, accessibility of that content within the library, but also by connecting that content to other pieces of the tech stack to ensure that those assets and content are being distributed and consumed both efficiently and effectively within that organization. So today, of course, Media Valet is the example of the DAM solution. Sean, back to you.
So now that we understand a little bit more about the context in which we're going to be talking about streamlining and scaling marketers and creatives workflows, let's talk about why we should care. Like, why do we want to scale and streamline our production, our marketing output? Well, we're operating in an environment where we're interacting and engaging with our customers through more channels than ever. Even 10 years ago, there was not nearly the scale of channels that are available today across technology, physical space, you name it. And so this presents a really big problem, a really big challenge when it comes to presenting a cohesive and consistent customer experience and brand presence. But there's a real payoff. So something like 67% of our customers regularly use more than one channel to make purchases. And so if we're not interacting with those customers, we're actually leaving a lot of money and potential business on the table, because those shoppers or those customers that engage across more than one channel have a 30% higher lifetime value than those that only interact via one channel. And so with this proliferation of channels, there's also a proliferation of tools. So the marketing tech stack is humongous. I don't know if you've all seen the sort of infographic that shows over 5,000 marketing tools, but on average, marketers are using about 12 different tools in their day-to-day jobs, and some are using upwards of 31 tools to manage campaigns and data. And so this has led to an explosion of operational complexity that ultimately kind of drains your time, whether you're switching back and forth between tabs or consolidating information across platforms. It's exhausting. It breaks your creative flow and causes more miscommunication and introduces errors. And finally, our customers and the war for their mind share is really intense. So you've got competition that are engaging with your customers across all of these channels, and they're doing it in a way that is highly personalized and highly relevant in the context or time that the content is delivered. And so customers have come to expect a highly personalized, highly relevant marketing experience. And this has led to an explosion of the volume and velocity of work. And ultimately, this fast pace and volume leads to sort of a situation where we've got a lot of priorities that change very quickly. So how can we as marketers and creatives overcome these challenges and deliver amazing assets and campaigns at scale?
Awesome, Sean. Great introduction, and thanks for kind of setting the stage for the meat of today's conversation. So let's get into our secrets. So secret number one is going to be keep it consistent. So this first secret or best practice that we want to discuss is really about the importance of making consistency a priority for companies today with respect to their a few different things, brands and process. And so for marketers and creatives, this is super important. In the first area that we'll talk about is going to be the branding aspect of this. So when you look at having a consistent look and feel across today's multitude of channels, as Sean described, and sort of why those channels are each important, it's really tough. But as Sean described, it's also really necessary for becoming and remaining a really high quality, easily recognizable brand in today's really noisy market. So it's really important to note with respect to that consistency of branding, that effective branding, the impact on the customers, it goes really far beyond just a pleasant visual experience. And it actually impacts the credibility and trust that the organization can build with the customers. In keeping with that, studies have found 50% of the brain is used to translate that visual data being shown to the customer base. And tied to this, customers are now making judgments about your brand simply by visually processing what they see. And so the result is that if you have, even little but frequent inconsistencies, that starts to chip away at the trust that you're attempting to build with those customers through your branding and messaging. So let's take an example. let's look at one of the most recognizable brands in the world, Apple. So as you can see in the slide, everything that Apple does is unmistakably Apple. They're renowned for their attention to detail, and it's probably considered unparalleled within the industry. So let's imagine now that you are a customer of Apple and you're very familiar with their branding, and you're also very expectation of the type of messaging that you expect to receive from them. Like this pop up in your inbox. So the question is, would you open it? You'd immediately know that it's not Apple because they're an entire company, right? So if we look at this example shown on the screen right now, there are some really obvious unbranded elements that don't map to what Apple does. So for example, the really easy one is just the sender name, right? So we're looking at cloud.com instead of apple.com. You can look at the logo. Everything that Apple puts out is the classic Apple. It's not a sort of stock icon as a cloud logo. Even things like the font can start to become apparent that it's not consistent with their typical branding. So as a viewer, as a user, your guard is immediately up. And again, you start to sort of have those feelings of a lack of trust of the message that you're being sent. And so, when you look at the differences between branding within an organization, the example we're showing today in this email, they're really clear and obvious, but creating that cohesive and really consistent branding is actually really difficult, particularly as your company or your organization grows. And that erosion of trust that we're talking about can actually be quantified. And so if your branding isn't cohesive, it turns out that you're leaving a lot of money on the table. According to a study by Lucid Press, the average revenue increase attributed to always presenting a brand super consistently is on average 23%. So it's material. And there's something behind, that real concerted effort to maintain consistency throughout your brand. So let's look at kind of 4 key areas of how we can establish that consistent branding within our organizations today. So number 1, let's talk about establishing branding documentation as a tool that we can all use. So this is one of the most easy and most important ways to maintain consistent branding across this multitude of channels that we've already alluded to a few times today. And so what we can do is just create really thorough and detailed brand guidelines. Good brand guideline documentation really covers everything from logo usage, imagery, what your hero images are, what those kind of iconic shots are to represent your company, as well as color palettes, fonts, things like that. It all sort of collaborates and contributes to that really hyper consistent messaging that you're pushing out to your customers. And it's a lot more than just visual as well. So guidelines should also include information around, what voice are you using to talk to your customers, what's the tone of that voice, and as well the style of the messaging, right? Is it very formal? Is it informal, more casual? Things like that. And if you can get that right across your entire organization, you start to achieve this consistency that we're trying for. When you think about creating these guidelines, it's obviously not just enough to create them and sort of employ the set it and forget it attitude. Like any initiative, this also would need to be driven. In organizations, when they endeavor on something like this, they need to make sure that the guidelines are appropriately rolled out to the required teams. They need to be reviewed, ideally with the entire company on a regular basis, but most certainly the marketing and creative teams that are using them every day. And also keep them, and this is a key point, keep them somewhere easily accessible for everybody. If people don't know, if they know of them, but they don't know where to go to get them, you can guess how much they're going to be used. So number 2, encouraging brand stewardship. So everybody on the marketing team, ideally the whole company if possible, should consider themselves a steward of your brand, right? And this is going to, I think really make a big impact for a company where the job of the folks on the marketing team in this regard is really to make sure that everybody knows exactly who to go to if they see something like an outdated logo or an off-color palette in the communications, but also that they feel comfortable raising that issue and not feeling like they're almost like tattletaling on someone or something like that. Number 3, it's really key for this consistency to keep assets in a single location. So perhaps, most importantly, keeping all of these in a single source of truth. I mean, that word, that phrase is thrown around a lot, but it is really important. And this can be done using a spectrum of different solutions. So on the light end of the spectrum, you're looking at something, maybe a basic file sharing solution like Google Drive or OneDrive, something like that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, that's where a user-friendly enterprise-level DAM platform like MediaValet would land. And having this key element in place, no matter which type of solution that you do choose, it just makes it easier for everyone to locate and use those on-brand assets. And it really de-risks this scenario where people are going rogue and kind of creating their own assets or versions of assets, or the classic case of pulling a low-res image or logo from Google to stick on the cover sheet of an important proposal. So number 4, and the last one that we'll talk about with respect to branding, is defining the file naming conventions. And this is really critical. What it does is avoids having multiple similar assets or content all with the word final in their title and having confusion reign about which one is the actual correct asset to use for a given scenario. So I would say, how many of us have come across that document or file named file name dot version 2 underscore final underscore final final. We would suggest that something, just a simple little trick like including the date in your file naming convention, it can prompt that kind of human behavior that when someone sees that file and it's dated a few years back, automatically something pops up, a red flag pops up, and they'll just question its relevance. And I think when you're talking about DAM as well, the file name is really just a piece of metadata. And this is a whole other conversation, so we won't really get into it today, but metadata in general is one of the most critical elements of DAM and sort of the process that injects into a company that make it so critical in achieving the brand consistency that we're talking about today. So now I'm just going to hand it back to you, Sean, and maybe you can run through some of the processes that relate to maintaining brand consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. So the second piece to brand consistency, as Fraser mentioned, is process. And having a well-defined process actually makes it easier to achieve brand consistency. Now, if you're like me, a marketer or creative, you kind of groan at process. It's a necessary evil. Sometimes it hinders productivity. And ultimately, this is an artifact of bad process. So what good process will do, if it's defined end-to-end and streamlined, it actually frees you up to focus on creativity and makes it possible to scale production while keeping quality consistent. And so you may be thinking that your team doesn't really have processes, but a lack of process is essentially its own process. It's disorganized, it's maybe not very good, but before you can nail down a consistent process, you have to have a solid understanding of your team's current workflows and what is and isn't working. So at Wrike, we have an exercise called process mapping, and we usually do this during deployment. And essentially, it's a technique that can help you kind of organize and discover the way your team gets things done. And so the first step here is to inventory your current processes, projects, and deliverables. The next step is to prioritize those activities according to impact. And then third step here is to identify triggers, which are essentially the starting points of processes, and then ultimately the deliverables or endpoints. And then list the steps that are necessary in between the triggers and deliverables that ultimately are required to traverse that path. And so this will help you visualize how information flows across your team and organization. And it really helps you identify what's working, what isn't, and where you can be essentially more efficient and more consistent to ultimately produce a better product of work. And so what you'll end up with is something like this. And this is an example workflow of an example project for how you might build a web page. And what you'll see is that depending on your deliverable, your organization, your unique business structure, and even sometimes the industry that you're in, this will look very different, but there are often common elements like intake and scoping, the execution and collaboration or creation of the product of your work. There's often a review cycle, and then ultimately delivery or production. And then you want to report on that work. So one of the things that you can do with a system like Wrike is templatize this whole process. And there are a couple of, actually 4 different ways that you can templatize your processes. And the first is to define obviously the deliverables, the tasks and subtasks that go into completing a project. But then there's also workflow. And so workflow is a really powerful way to communicate status. And Wrike lets you set up custom workflow statuses and use things like dashboards or our Kanban view to then view work in real time and easily understand sort of the progress of that work. And so you're kind of probably looking at this chart and thinking, wow, this is really complicated. And often good processes can get super complicated, but a system like Wrike that allows you to templatize this then allows you to simply clone that template each time you start a new project. So rather than starting from scratch, reinventing the wheel, key components like dependencies, task duration, assignees, and task descriptions are just simply copied over. And so this saves you a ton of time and frees you up to focus on more complex, more creative, more impactful areas of marketing work. And they also make it easier to then measure and improve performance over time so that you can drive repeatable wins for your team and ultimately produce a more consistent product. And so the key aspect here of defining your process is defining roles and responsibilities. So let's look at maybe one of the like sort of stages of the process that or the project that I showed previously, and where we often see people getting hung up, and that's the review and approval stage. And so this happens when there's a sort of a confusion about who owns what, who the actual approvers are, and from project to project, a lack of consistency around who has final approval for things like creative assets or web pages causes teams to go around in circles and often deliver late, off-brand, or inconsistent material. And so one way to combat this is to use a framework like RACI or DACI or Cairo to define roles and responsibilities and use these to build out a robust review and approval structure. So Wrike is a really great tool for this aspect of the creative and marketing work process. Wrike Proof, which is part of the Wrike for Marketer solution, streamlines the review process by allowing teams to assign approvers, communicate approval deadlines, and make sure that approvers know when the ball is in their court. So ultimately, you're going to streamline your entire approval process and have a much more consistent group of people than reviewing that asset or that project, and ultimately a more consistent brand presence or customer experience at the end.
Good stuff, Sean. Thanks for taking us through the process piece of achieving brand consistency. So let's jump in now to secret number 2, don't break the flow. So this one is all about, as you might guess, workflow. So like we mentioned earlier, or like Sean mentioned earlier, marketers can use up to 31 different tools to do their jobs. And every time a worker has to move from one tool to another, there's this period of mental adjustment and refocusing that has to take place. And we kind of call this like a switching cost. And so when you look at that, not only you have this wasted time logging in and out of different tools if that's what's going on within this team, but there's also really precious productivity loss during this adjustment period as well, where you're ramping up. And the same goes for switching tasks in general, even if you're using the same tool. So as you can see in this slide, on average, it takes about 25 minutes to get back into a state of flow after being distracted by whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. And so the interesting thing is when you start to look at this within the context of the actual workday, it happens once, that's roughly 5% of a typical 8-hour workday. twice, now you're looking at 10% of this lost productivity time or switching cost time. So you can start to see how quickly this can really add up to have a material impact, a negative impact on a team's productivity. And what's interesting, if we look at the next slide here, the switching cost, it actually affects different types of roles across a spectrum. And the impact on someone like a creative in particular, a marketer in particular, is at the high end of that, because the work that they're doing, like designing or writing or things like that, of that nature, they require this particular concentration and state of mind to get into and to do them well. And so when you look at adding this unnecessary time spent switching tools and tasks, it chips away materially at the time they have to actually do their job. And in fact, I think it was a recent Wrike creative survey, 61% of agency and in-house creatives cited that their biggest challenge was not enough time to be creative. So it's a legitimate challenge that we need to try to address with a proper solution. So let's look at how we can fix that. And what does a solution look like? So first things first, the recommendation is start by decluttering your tech stack. Over the course of, digital transformation initiatives throughout even a department, but also an organization, companies have, as you can imagine, collected a ton of technology. There's literally now a solution for every problem you didn't even know you had. I would here go back and reference the exact same slide, the Chief MarTech slide that Sean referenced earlier, that has 5,000 plus creative and marketing technology solutions on it. Like that's insane. That's totally unmanageable. So we need to take a step back and ask ourselves here, is every tool in our tech stack still necessary today, even if it was 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago? Past that, is there another tool out there that could help us consolidate 2, 3, or 4 more of our tools into one solution? If that answer is no, what about integrating? So can we integrate 2 or more of our tools to achieve a better state and minimize the switching cost that our teams are being exposed to these days? So a good example of this is what we're doing as Media of LA with Wrike through our partnership. And so that's focused predominantly on combining a project and marketing or creative file management solution like a DAM. So creatives are often, like as we cited, wasting this valuable time moving between projects and file management systems. And it also can mean, for a relevant day-to-day task level example, that they've got to upload the same asset twice in 2 separate places. And this type of activity, as an example, can take quite a while depending on the file size, particularly if you're using really heavy high-res versions. Another thing it can lead to is causing version control issues between these 2 systems, because now you've got to look at that from a source of truth. So which one is the correct one? And if they're not mapping and syncing together, you've got a bit of an issue there. So integrating these 2 platforms can solve a lot of these types of issues for a user, right? So with the Media of LA and Wrike integration, for example, or as it's called, Wrike Publish, teams can access and publish approved assets within Media of LA directly from within Wrike. So if you think about what that looks like, you're in Wrike, you're creating a task. You don't have to go switch windows and go into Media of LA to access the assets or content that you want to add into that task. You can do that right from within Wrike's UI, and that type of activity can save considerable time. So now that task is in motion. You're creating a campaign that goes through a review and approval cycle. It gets approved for use. And now from Wrike, again, you can now push that completed and finished asset into Media of LA, again, from within that Wrike task. So when you start to look at these types of motions that happen within a creative or marketer's day-to-day and the number of times that they happen, combined, a lot of these features start to add up and save substantial time, but also make people's day-to-day tasks a lot easier and a lot less painful, which is one of the key intents of connecting these types of solutions. Other small things are like mapping metadata between the systems. So if you're creating a custom field within Wrike at the asset level, all of that gets gets sort of ported into Media Valet into the appropriate attribute or metadata field within the DAM environment. So again, this consistency and streamlined approach between these two types of solutions is a really strong value proposition we're finding for a lot of our joint customers. Sean, I think you've got an example as well, I believe.
Yeah, thanks, Fraser. So I want to like sort of point back to something Fraser said. It takes 25 minutes after being distracted to get back into the flow. And so this is super important when it comes to creatives. And so we have another integration partner, actually a mutual integration partner with Media Valet, that's Adobe. And if you think about work management and the creative flow, they're entirely different parts of your brain. So switching back and forth between the two can lead to a lot longer creative development cycles. And so ultimately, what we've done at Wrike is created an extension for Adobe Creative Cloud that allows creatives to stay in the zone. So essentially, we want to do everything we can to minimize disruptions to the creative flow while still allowing them to participate in the work management process that allows you to essentially like do things like resource management or load balancing on your team, and ultimately up-level the quality, consistency, the impactfulness, and the volume which your team produces. And so with Wrike's extension for Adobe Creative Cloud, our designers, our creative managers can stay within the tools they love while doing everything from accepting a creative brief to collaborating on that creative request with stakeholders. You can then submit a completed design for review, participate in the proofing and approval process, and then ultimately disposition the job as completed once all of the feedback has been incorporated. And so this is a really huge step in making the lives of creatives a lot easier when it comes to kind of functioning in those more robust creative teams that are part of either agencies that are super high volume or in-house creative teams that service large marketing organizations. So the next part is also to minimize repetitive administrative tasks. So something like 46% of knowledge workers report that they're spending 3 to 7 hours a week on administrative tasks like chasing creative briefs, getting projects approved, and further 34% spent a whopping 7 hours a week on administrative work. So that's almost a full day out of your 40-hour work week. And we actually ran a survey through our professional services org that showed 72% of respondents said that they could achieve 30% or more work increase if technology were able to automate the repetitive administrative parts of their jobs. And so automation on a platform like Wrike and through the integration with digital asset management systems like Media Valet really makes it possible for teams to sort of meet that increasing demand that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar. And just some examples of the things that you can automate are, task and project creation and assignment, status update and notifications, and then also weekly reporting, which is super important when you have a high volume creative team and you want to measure operations. And then also, as Fraser mentioned, the automation of porting metadata from a system that's managing the work to the digital asset management system is super important. So Fraser, if you want to continue on to secret number 3.
Absolutely, thanks, Sean. That's a great sort of summary there on how we can endeavor to keep our customers in a better state of flow as they do their work. So, like Sean said, secret number 3, let's tuck into it here. That is around centralizing everything. I think we can all agree that nothing gets in the way of us delivering more than missing, incorrect, or conflicting information that we need to do our jobs day to day. So not only looking for missing project details, missing feedback, missing materials, it wastes a ton of time, but it also causes frustration. and opens up the door really wide for error to seep into our project. So Sean, I think you're going to kick this one off. How about you run us through some of your findings and insights in this key area?
Sure, yeah. So a pretty common experience across marketing and creative roles is sort of struggling to keep up with ad hoc requests. And the issue here is that these requests can pour in through a number of different channels, like whether it's email or chat, a hallway conversation, a meeting, a comment in a Google Doc, what have you. And so this last minute ad hoc request often will slow us down. It creates a lot of chaos, and ultimately these requests are probably incomplete. They don't have enough information, and ultimately it leads to sort of difficulty in accurately scoping work, prioritizing work, and not to mention like wasting time chasing down more details. And so something like 63% of creative teams see ad hoc requests at least once a week. And so it's super important to centralize and standardize your intake process as a creative or marketing team that's working on high volume ad hoc requests. And what this allows you to do is essentially designate one channel versus, a number of different that you have to pay attention to. Now you only have to pay attention to one channel. And it's important to make sure that everyone in your organization knows that requests outside of this channel will no longer be accepted or prioritized. So in addition, like centralizing around one channel allows you to also standardize. So you can create a consistent format that these requests need to be in. And the best format is one that offers a list of relevant questions for requesters to answer. And you can think of this like a template. And while it might be tough for your teammates to transition from asking you for random favors to following a specific request process, taking the time to explain how this is centralized and highly organized approach can benefit other teams is really important as well. So you can explain to them that getting all the information you need to properly prioritize scope and execute on their requests up front will actually help them get their needs met faster. And you can quantify it if you measure the average time it takes to start a project before having the designated request forms and then after. And so I mentioned request forms because that's a key part of how Wrike streamlines, centralizes, and standardizes request intake. And so what this allows you to do is establish a formal process for inbound jobs while providing all the necessary details to get started. So Wrike has the dynamic request forms that will actually map to the input that requesters specify. So if they're requesting, say, a video, we won't ask them 100 questions about a web page. And so ultimately, this will help you increase engagement in this intake process so that you get the necessary information you need. And then ultimately, you can then automatically map that to the right people, the right location. And ultimately, this leads to getting work off the ground and in flight much, much faster, assigning the right people to it, and then ultimately, it will decrease the cycle time on your creative projects. Another area that I've talked about a little bit previously is the feedback cycle. So, in addition to defining the roles and responsibility during approval and review, it's super important to create a single space where review takes place. And so without this, you're left collecting feedback over email, chat, notes in the documents themselves or the assets themselves. And consolidating this information across tools is super time consuming, it's confusing, and ultimately, feedback is missed, and sometimes it's often conflicting, and you're kind of stuck in the middle, you're caught in the middle. And in fact, like what we've seen is that it's the #1 reason for project delays. And ultimately, this impacts things like client satisfaction, interdepartmental relations, et cetera. And so let's talk about the feedback process a little bit more. And so first and foremost, stop using email. It's not a great tool for collecting feedback. It's great for sort of sending information from one person to many, but it's not effective for sort of the many to many or many to one communication that is necessary during a feedback cycle, and that makes collaboration extremely difficult. So larger groups will find themselves lost in a sea of lengthy, convoluted email threads. This gets especially crazy with outside partners or clients who may not always CC the right person. Not to mention, email attachments are notorious for causing version control problems because no one can be sure they're looking at the same file. So with Wrike, you can choose another, like a singular platform that powers the one-to-many, many-to-many, and many-to-one communication to manage feedback. And this allows you to establish clear roles and responsibilities like we mentioned earlier, and it's extremely important. This makes sure that the right stakeholders are always involved and being held accountable. And it also helps to avoid the issue of having too many cooks in the kitchen, which can slow progress down considerably. So I don't know if you've shared this experience, but often sort of there's always that last minute feedback from executives or management or somebody that you didn't even think was part of the process, and you're stuck kind of in this endless loop. And so we have a tool called Wrike Proof that I mentioned earlier that makes it possible to assign a specific reviewers and approvers, but it also makes it extremely easy to collect real-time collaborative feedback in one place. So when your image is ready for feedback, you can simply add it to a Wrike task, image, video, document, what have you, and mention all the stakeholders you need feedback from. They can visually mark up the image with and then attach that markup, that visual markup, to comments. So this provides a mechanism to provide like really clear and actionable feedback. And since they're all giving feedback in the same place, they can discuss and collaborate and mention one another, on sort of like getting more feedback or clarifying things, or even sort of just like one file with actionable consolidated feedback to work with. So in other words, you're not in that process of sort of collecting all the feedback across tools. And so this will save a ton of time. And often, you'll have less iterations, back and forth communication will happen, in one place and ultimately decrease. And then also it ensures that your client or your stakeholder is involved in the process. So we have features within Wrike Proof that allow you to invite folks, outside of your Wrike account into the review and approval process, and ultimately, increasing their satisfaction.
That's awesome, Sean. I think the last key piece of the kind of quote unquote centralize everything conversation that I wanted to talk a little bit about is relating to the digital assets or content that is fueling the creation of these marketing campaigns or these marketing and creative projects. So when we look at the benefit of centralizing the digital assets within an organization, it's really around addressing some of the classic challenges faced by marketing organizations. So these things aren't, they're not going to be, I think, super unique to the audience today. They're very simple, but we do find that they are, regardless of their simplicity, they're still pervasive within a lot of organizations today. And that is, the amount of time spent searching for the right assets or content within, shared file servers or external hard drives, storage locations. It has a dramatic impact on the productivity of those teams. The result is that often, you often wind up getting these requests sent through for creating materials that already exist. And you can imagine that this issue is just getting bigger and bigger as single campaigns are now being pushed out across more and more channels, as that's sort of one of the first things that Sean mentioned in today's webinar. So I just wanted to run today through a few examples of how DAM can assist with these types of challenges. So The number one piece is, get it all into a single library so you know where it is. Ideally, that library, that media library, is cloud-based because that enables global access to a organization driven in many cases today by remote workers. So if you can keep all of these key files in one place, it just makes it really easy for others to know where to go. And again, that all users have that access regardless of location, and they're not sort of, behind the fence, so to speak, when they need to grab content for an urgent campaign or other marketing project that comes up. The second piece, and I can't stress the importance of this enough, is discoverability. This is a key fundamental component of DAM. Knowing where to go to a single source of truth media library does not make a difference if there's not a robust way to sort through, in some cases, thousands on the low end, and on the high end, millions of different assets. And also, and to really find what you need in a timely manner. Right, so one of the key things, and I touched briefly on it earlier, is the application of really rich metadata in the use of advanced search features. And metadata in this case can be anything from categories that those assets are assigned to, keywords, file names, dates, photographers' names. It can really be anything, and ideally it maps really directly to the organization's business process and how they actually want to categorize and structure that library. So discoverability is a very, very key piece. The third one really relates to the compliance and governance conversation around DAM. And that is, preventing unauthorized use of assets or contents that perhaps have a license attached to them. So this is dealing with things like asset use tracking, version control of those assets, user permissions. So what you're aiming to do is really control, I guess, at the administrative level, using things like customizable user permissions, what people can come into the DAM and see, but also what they can come into the DAM and do. So ultimately, the goal is that you're ensuring these folks coming in and accessing this content, they're only accessing that which is relevant to them and their role within the company. The fourth point is around tracking and updating work in progress and final assets. And this all relates back to kind of the fundamental topic of today's webinar, is workflow. And how do you create this streamlined process between multiple solutions that marketers are using throughout their day? So integrating with a tool and using a tool like Wrike to track and manage your creative team's work in progress files, but also distribute those final assets out to the appropriate teams is a really, really key piece. And it's also it's a conversation that we have literally on a daily basis with folks looking to start their DAM journey and get some additional technology and process in place to help them with this piece of the centralization conversation. Sean, that's it for me on the asset side. I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks for tying it all together, Fraser. So now that we've kind of gone through the three secrets, and hopefully these can arm you with some tools to better scale and streamline your marketing and creative workflows, we're going to switch gears and chat with Adam Storm. He's Technical Operations Manager at Miles Partnership, to hear how he puts some of the best practices in place at Miles Partnership. And so thanks again so much for joining us, Adam. Can you tell us a little bit more about Miles Partnership and your role there?
Yeah, so Miles Partnership, we're a destination marketing company. Our clients are mostly individual city and states throughout the country and internationally as well. We produce custom marketing programs for each of our clients, largely comprised of print and digital products like magazines, websites, email marketing campaigns, along with digital strategy and AOR components. My role as production manager, I support all of our employees' operational needs to ensure they're able to work as efficiently as possible. And I manage our project management, time tracking solutions, along with other systems.
Awesome. So what would you say has been the most difficult part of managing creative and marketing workflows and production at Miles?
I think it is really around the customization of the products that we offer our clients, and to build out workflows that are customizable enough to adapt to those new products that we're creating, but also rigid enough so that we have somewhat consistency in our processes.
Great. So how do you ensure consistent branding and processes among your team and ultimately the organization as a whole?
Yeah. You know, it really comes down to some of the things you've mentioned already, like documentation, centralization, and communication. It's, you know, brand guidelines have to be well documented and clear to the entire team that's working with that client. And then the centralization of that information so that there aren't different versions in multiple places. You know, a lot of times our clients go through, you know, rebranding, and during those times, it's important to, you know, archive off the old branding information and make sure that what's left is the current and accurate one. So, you know, our teams are professional. We're a marketing company, so that's what it's ingrained in what we do.
Great. So how have tools like Wrike Proof and the Media Valet integration helped your team create effective campaigns at scale?
Yeah, so, you know, we generally do a large migration of assets when we like get new clients or get a new project in. We'll get a hard drive with assets, and that'll be imported in the system. But what I'm really excited about with the Media Valet Wrike integration is being able to add assets as they come in. We might get like additional assets that come in throughout the project. We can immediately add it through Wrike. It's connected to the task, all the communications right there. And then also as we're building out our final you know, proofs for those projects, having that also in the system, and then being able to just import that right into Media Valet from Wrike is very valuable.
Thank you so much, Adam. So actually, we're at the top of the hour, so we don't have any time for questions. But if there are a few in the box, we will do our best to get back to you to answer some of the more specific questions. And if you have any more questions at all, or if you want to learn more about Wrike or Media Valet, visit Wrike.com or MediaValet.com. We'll also be sending out an email very shortly, tomorrow probably, with the recording and a little bit more information and resources for you to look into. So I'm sure a lot of those questions will get answered then. So thank you again so much for joining our webinar today, and hope you have a great rest of your day.